Hey, thanks for checking out The Solid Verbal. Now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel for college football content all off season long.
Welcome back to The Solid Verbal, boys and girls. My name is Ty Hildenbrand. That guy over there, way over there in sunny Southern California, coming back home for the week. Dan Rubenstein, sir. How you doing?
I'm good, Ty. It's nice to have the sun. It's nice to have a change of scenery. I'm not in a basement. I'm in, once again, my middle brother's childhood bedroom. So if you're watching this on YouTube, what's up, everybody? I'm in Max's room.
Beautiful. Well, it's good to speak with you as well. Kind of back to our roots here when you were out in the West Coast. I'm still here in Eastern Pennsylvania. The Verballerhood's still out there, downloading, listening, supporting the show. We're ever so grateful. Don't forget, make sure you hit subscribe. Make sure you tell your friends. We've got 2 public episodes every week. We've also got a bonus episode in addition to other perks like Discord and other things that we're doing out on patreon.com. You can go to verballers.com if you want to get the shortcut over to our section. You can sign up to be either a certified or premium verballer as the off-season continues to heat up. We got a lot to talk about. We've been talking a lot about the business stuff over the last week or so with conference realignment and potential media deals and things like that. And that's all important. Don't get me wrong. But when you start talking about the business administrative side, when we're talking about media rights and numbers and money, and people's eyes, or in this case, ears, tend to glaze over. That's not exactly exciting listening by any stretch. So today we decided maybe we're going to heat things up a little bit and get to a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts, whether you're a college football fan or, frankly, an NFL fan, Dan. We're going to start talking about the NFL draft. Just a little, just a smidge.
Yeah, and not necessarily because I know anything about the NFL and teams' needs and draft value and anything that would relate to, I could see Bryce Young projecting this type of player in this type of NFL system being protected by lines that shift and slide and this. Nope, that's not a thing I have. I barely have college knowledge, as anybody who listens to the show can attest. I don't watch the NFL until the playoffs. And I really can't help you out in terms of how Darnell Washington fits in, 12 personnel in the NFC East or something. But I think we should use this opportunity as, reporters say, we empty the notebook, right? We're going to empty the take cannon, when talking about some of the more higher profile guys and say, here's how I feel about this player now that he has moved on from the college game. And this is his legacy to me, Dan, or to you, Ty. Does that make sense?
It does. And you know this because we've been doing the show a long time. Every year around the NFL draft, there is this natural source of conflict between college football fans who watch games religiously every Saturday in the fall versus the draftniks who try to project how some of these guys could fit in on the NFL level. And a recent example, albeit a bit of a problematic one in hindsight, but I remember watching Deshaun Watson at Clemson. And I remember saying to you, and I remember people sending it to us, wow, he looks like he could probably be a really good NFL player. There were doubts.
For sure.
There were doubts before he got drafted. We're talking about football, not about anything else. Mm-hmm. But there were doubts, and then Deshaun Watson blew up and turned out to be a really good pro, at least for a moment in time. And every college fan out there, like you and I, so we told you. We knew it all along. What were the draft guys thinking? This show today, this episode, is really the college fan's guide to some NFL draft picks. What we've seen, what we've gravitated towards. As you said, we've got a handful, a collection of some of the bigger name guys that are obviously going to make headlines, have already started making headlines as the NFL scouting combine was just over the past week. So we thought we'd go through. We thought we'd take a look at what some folks on the NFL side are saying about the bigger name guys and what we're going to say about the bigger name guys, just the experience of watching them over the last 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, who did we have on last year who actually knows
Nate
this
Tice.
stuff
We had
from
Nate
the
Tice
NFL
on.
per se? Nate Tice from The Athletic,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, we've had Nate Tice on. We had Bob Mays, as I like to call him, Robert Mays, who does a terrific job. I think they podcast together, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Robert Mays and Nate Tice. So I think we're in good company when we have people like that on the show because they approach it from a different angle, probably a better and more productive angle. But did you watch any clips from the Combine this year?
Yeah,
did you read news? What did anything stand out to you just from like, oh, I'm glad he performed physically like I expected him to because of what I saw on the field these past 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
That is actually a perfect segue to kick this thing off. That is a pro segue, Dan, if you are ready to dive in here.
Come on, stop it.
Here's what we're going to do. So we're going to go through, we're going to name all these guys, and then if you would want to draft them, or if you not want to draft them, that will really be like a binary decision. So it's a pass-fail. If they pass, if you'd want them on your team.
Ooh.
Okay, nice little sound. If you wouldn't.
I like that.
Maybe a little overdramatic, but you get the point.
Sure.
Why don't we start
I'm with you.
With that setup with Anthony Richardson? You talk about what stood out to me at the NFL Combine. Anthony Richardson ran a 4.43. He set the all-time record for quarterbacks in both the vertical and broad jump. Clearly, Anthony Richardson at 6'4", 244 is a specimen. Anthony Richardson, of course, out of the University of Florida. He decided to enter the draft early. The NFL looks at this guy. I've read a lot of the scouting reports. They see a potential Cam Newton, Dan.
Sure.
They see Cam Newton. They see the size. They see the strength. They see his athleticism. They can see how he tested at the Combine. And, like, it's all there. The physical tools are there. You look at what he did as a runner at Florida. Big runs, right? Ran for touchdowns this past season of 45, 60, 73, 80, and 81 yards. Just over the past 2 seasons, excuse me, not just last season. But you get the point. He's got a lot of explosivity in those legs. And clearly, given his frame, he's somebody who you would think could stand up pretty well to the NFL, the rigor of a 17-game schedule. The weaknesses, I think we'll probably speak to the weaknesses here. But when you look at a guy like Anthony Richardson, obviously you get excited about all the measurables. But as for watching Anthony Richardson as a college player, as for the experience of rooting him on, we both were pretty into Anthony Richardson. What say you?
The best of Anthony Richardson at Florida. So whether that was sort of in relief or as sort of a changeup 2 years ago with Emory Jones and the Dan Mullen system, and then the best of him this past year, year one with Billy Napier, were flashes of being the best quarterback in America. Physically, that arm, the ability to turn a 7-yard run into a 91-yard run.
Yeah.
The peak of Anthony Richardson, you understand why there are Cam Newton comparisons. But I've mentioned this before. I'm most interested in what a quarterback's 7th best throw looks like. 11th best throw looks like, because ultimately that's what wins and loses games, right? The ability to, it wasn't a great throw, but it was a 13-yard completion down the field to a tight end up the seam. And so, again, I clearly see what NFL teams see in Anthony Richardson.
Sure.
But with all of these physical comparisons, all of these what's the phrase, Ty? Built different. He's not built similarly. He's built different. Oh, yeah. So you understand the seduction that an NFL scout would feel because of these measurables, because of the best of Anthony Richardson. The concerning thing to me is when you compare somebody to Cam Newton started 1 year and was actually excellent all year long. When you compare somebody who has that burner speed, like I saw clips of Justin Fields this year, right? He was great with the Bears. He was actually excellent with Ohio State all the time. When you see what Lamar Jackson did, actually excellent.
All the time.
And so all of the time, all of the friggin' time. That's how you end up in New York all the time for a Heisman ceremony. And so the concerning thing to me is people are going to say, well, Josh Allen had accuracy issues and was really raw when he was at Wyoming. I'm always going to see Josh Allen as the exception to the rule. And that was a level down, so maybe it's a competition thing, maybe it's what your teammates are thing. And I understand the change of coaches, some change in system. They had a ton of firepower at receiver and running back, and that obviously kind of fell off a slope this year in terms of where they were with Kadarius Toney and Kyle Pitts, guys like that. But if we're talking about a first-round quarterback, if not a top 5 quarterback, is that where he's being discussed? I think.
Yeah, I mean, some people have had him as high as 1, Dan. 1 overall.
The experience of being a Florida fan, which I'm not, and watching Anthony Richardson is you are ready for excellence at any given moment, transcendent excellence, or throwing a 147 mile an hour slant on 3rd and 3 to a receiver 5 yards away. And so I worry that there's a little bit of makes the impossible seem possible and makes the possible seem impossible to Anthony Richardson. Yeah. That to me is his legacy, where he did things that nobody else in the sport could do at that size. And yet it's that 7th best throw, 9th best throw, 15th best throw that would have me pretty heartbroken as a Gator fan, probably.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, there's a reason they compare him to Cam Newton. There's a reason. I get it. Like you said, I understand why NFL people are really into Anthony Richardson. I love the kid. We did a show last summer, a Q&A show. Somebody asked us, which player are you most excited to watch in 2023? I said Anthony Richardson. I said he was the guy I was most excited to watch because not only are the measurables off the chart and he's a big specimen and he's a unique talent, but there's no question about the big playability. He is exciting to watch. The best of Anthony Richardson is really freaking exciting. So I get it. Mm-hmm. My problem with him as a draft pick is exactly what you described. It's that, at least based on these projections, you are drafting based on the flashes and not so much on the body of work. Right now, if we're talking about right now, he's a much better runner than a passer. I think he knows where to go with the ball when he drops back, but accuracy has been all over the place. Accuracy needs to be fixed. The scouts say that's mostly a result of footwork. They would know better than me.
Okay.
That can be corrected. I hope for his sake it can. But it's not just the footwork that needs the work. There are a lot of things that need work in the passing game. He can't just drop back and be a runner at the next level. He needs a situation with a good quarterback coach. He needs a situation where he can wait on the bench and get some seasoning, not where he's thrown into the fire and expected to lead presumably a bad team, right, to the playoffs or to a 500 record. He is not Joe Burrow coming into the NFL where he's just ready for it all. Anthony Richardson is an exciting prospect. He's going to need a lot of work. And I hope for his sake, he is given a situation where it's a talented quarterback coach that's willing to help with some of these things that clearly he needs work on. I personally,
wow,
for as excited as I am about Anthony Richardson as a prospect, and I'm rooting like hell for all of the kids we're going to describe. I'm not rooting against any of these guys openly. I like Anthony Richardson. If I were drafting, I wouldn't pick him. Not in the first round. It's too big of a risk.
I understand where you're coming from. Quarterback is everything, as we know. I don't think I would either, because he is immediately going to be seen as a savior. And they're going to try whoever it is. I don't know if it's Indy or Houston or whoever ends up taking him. They're going to prefer to sit him for whatever amount of time, for him to get comfortable, to get, acclimated to NFL speed and systems and everything like that. But I just think, I think it's too much pressure on him, and I kind of understand why he turned pro. I'm sure he looked at where Florida's roster is right now and said to himself, I might as well try and get better quicker in the NFL. And I don't know if the transfer market was any sort of possibility, but where would he go?
No.
Where would he go that there is an immediate job available that would welcome him with open arms? Probably a lot of schools, but is he immediately going to get better at Alabama? Probably. But you weigh the calculus of going back to college, and if he is already seen because of his physical potential as a top 5 pick,
right,
what do you have to prove?
You have nothing to prove. You have nothing to gain by going.
If you're already there,
to a different situation where you have to learn the offense. And frankly, you, I think, stand more a chance of devaluing your draft stock if you make a move like that. He could be the first overall pick, and he didn't have to do that. So I root for him, but I think we're both on the same page here. We're saying no.
Yeah. I would really hesitate unless he got a full year and had that great coach and had the roster around him.
Yeah.
And I have no reason to believe that he isn't sort of a great quarterback student and a nerd about the position. You don't get this far in life as a quarterback without, having that aptitude. So I want to believe, right? The old X-Files, right?
Yeah.
I want to believe, but, there's just a little bit that worries me, and might say more about Florida than anything, where Florida's at as a program right now, where he's just looking at what's coming back and what isn't there and saying, it's time. It's time.
It was time. All right, where do you want to go next?
Let's stay quarterback. Let's go Bryce Young.
Bryce Young, Dan, 5'10 and 1/8 inches tall, 204, tipping the scales at 204. That is the headline. The headline is not that Bryce Young won a Heisman. The headline is not anything that Bryce Young did in his brief stay at Alabama, albeit very, very, very productive and very impressive.
2 years, third on the bench. Yeah.
Yeah. It is. He's small. He's slight by comparison. There are all sorts of numbers about quarterbacks this size and whether or not they worked out, whether or not they didn't. I know the experience of watching Bryce Young out there on a Saturday. He scared the hell out of everyone who played him. I wouldn't say he's a runner, but he is crazy elusive. And he always keeps his eyes up. That's the thing that killed people with Bryce Young. I think of the Texas game from last season. Down by 2, about a minute and a half left. 9 plays, 61 yards, kicking a field goal. He didn't kick the field goal, but got him in field goal range. They end up winning 20-19, largely on the back of his ability to be elusive, to keep his eyes downfield, and when a play breaks down, to find somebody open. He's very good at doing that. I have to believe those skills translate to the NFL, despite the fact that he's a bit undersized. But the guys that go to the NFL, and we see this a lot in college, who their primary is not open, they put their eyes down, they commit to the run, and they just bolt. Those guys generally don't work out. But the guys like Bryce Young, who have the wherewithal to look downfield at all times while scrambling outside the pocket, those are the ones that I think you keep your eye on. So I've said this time and again, if I were picking any of these quarterbacks, any of the 4 that we're going to discuss here today, the one that I would take, I think, hands down, would be Bryce Young. I get the concerns about his size. I know there's definitely a durability conversation to be had. A 17-game NFL schedule is grueling. I would take Bryce Young.
As would I. I would take Bryce Young for the reason that stepping into the program at Alabama that has the expectation of essentially win a national championship or it's a failure, won a Heisman. And whatever shortfalls came to Alabama this past season, losing to Tennessee, losing to LSU, I largely feel like an injured Bryce Young and a defense that gave up to Tennessee were largely the culprits for why Alabama didn't win a national championship this year. Now, or at least compete for, at least find themselves in the playoff with the ability to compete for, because Georgia was also clearly beyond. But with regard to Bryce Young, goes to a high-profile high school, goes to a high-profile college, immediately looks comfortable running a show.
Yeah.
A big show on a big stage. The thing that I guess the worry to me, and it's not as much maybe the size, and yes, you're 5'10", what'd you say, 204?
5'10
and a half,
5'10 and 1/8, Dan, to be exact.
5'10 and an eighth, 204 pounds. Yeah, there is the idea of, he's smaller, absorbing contact is, going to be a bigger issue. I think no quarterback has weighed in the first round that small, something like that. Like the lightest one was about 207.
Yeah, it's been a long time since we've had somebody this light.
He was able to get away with, both literally and figuratively, was able to get away with a lot because of his foot speed, his improvisation ability against really good SEC defenses, some okay SEC defense. You hit the nail on the head. He always had his eyes downfield.
Always.
People talk about video game numbers, comparing players to video game characters. The video gaminess of Bryce Young over these past couple years has been starts to scramble. All of a sudden, a linebacker in coverage sucks up to spy him or to cut him off before a first down, and Bryce Young does that gentle toss over the linebacker's head to the guy he was covering, to the safety's guy, whatever, which you can do in video games because we're not the ones sprinting. Easier said than done on an actual football field. And so that to me is Bryce Young's talent. As we've seen, quarterbacks who have succeeded and developed these past couple years, you have to have the ability to both throw in rhythm within an offense. You know, you take your 3-step, your 5-step drop, and this is when the tight end should appear over the seam. This is when the comeback should appear along the sideline. Bryce Young definitely has the ability to do this. And we talked about this with Caleb Williams, which I'm sure this is going to be our conversation next year. Has the ability, shows the ability, but sometimes it seems from afar relies on his own ability to buy time and go for an even bigger play because of the amount of time he can buy with receivers getting more and more open with space, downfield, whatever. So I think that's going to be an acclamation because as good as SEC edge rushers, you know, Harold Perkins got to Bryce Young. The top of the top can get to Bryce Young.
Yeah.
At the next level, Nick Bosa is going to get to Bryce Young because everybody's Harold Perkins, everybody's Nick Bosa across the league. And so him understanding his limits as somebody who can buy that time will be fascinating to watch because if he doesn't calibrate well early on, he's going to go down a lot.
Yeah.
So it is that comfort level, but yeah, of these guys, the quarterback who rose to the moment most often to me was Bryce Young. And, you know, in a number of ways, it actually feels like he was a little disappointing just because so many Alabama quarterbacks before him won national championships. And he was the guy who, for a number of reasons, be it offensive line inconsistency, you know, the receiving talent level, you know, the coaching attrition that happened on both sides of the ball, whatever reason, I'm sure there's a lot that went into Alabama not winning a national championship with Bryce Young. But yeah, there was that little bit like, that's just a different kind of Alabama quarterback career because he wasn't able to come away with the hardware.
He threw 80 touchdowns to 12 interceptions over his Alabama career. That includes one touchdown in his freshman year. But as you said, the last two seasons have just been ridiculous. You can do the math, 79 touchdowns to just 12 interceptions. He's been very, very solid. The NFL does not, the NFL.com breakdown for Bryce Young does not list a comp. They don't have a comp for him. I think it'd be very easy to compare him to a guy like a Kyler Murray.
Sure.
If only because of the size. Kyler Murray was 5'10", 207 at the combine. Definitely on the extreme smaller side in both of their cases. I would caution against going too far with that comparison. Kyler Murray was and still is an exceptional athlete. He could have been a pro baseball player. His arm is stronger. He's much, much more of a runner. He's quicker. These are not the same players. So don't draw that comparison. Even Kyler Murray has had mixed results, right? Never mind the off-field stuff, whether or not he's into Call of Duty. You know, he has had some injury history already in his time in the league. And so I think it's a fair point to raise with respect to Bryce Young. I just keep coming back to what we saw out there. He's incredibly mature in his ability to understand the offense right away. First year as a full-time starter, right away understood it, picked it up, was like a second coach out on the field. His ability to scramble, to buy time, I think is not something you can teach. Again, keeping his eyes down the field makes him very dangerous. He's the type of guy that you time and again would say, well, we left him too much time. His command of the offense, always knowing where guys are, being able to adjust on the fly is something that will definitely put him at, I think, a great advantage as he moves on to whatever team. He will be drafted in the first round. He should be. I think somebody will be very happy with him. I get where you're coming from.
If your team were drafting a quarterback, though, if your team is the Giants, correct?
I've said before I would take Bryce Young. Yeah.
You would take Bryce Young.
I'd love that Bryce Young.
And look, the ability on a certain level that he is going to be asked for, he will be contained within a pocket to go through progressions at 5'10", And look, guys have done it. Whether it's Kyler Murray, Drew Brees, Russell Wilson, it's more difficult to look over the heads of a 6'7" left tackle or something when you're 5'10" than when you're 6'4", 6'5". It's just, there is a difference. There is an arm angle thing. There is a footwork thing. It's more difficult. The degree of difficulty is there. If you believe that he can do it and you're a Giants fan, who am I to tell you? But I'm just saying, there's more on his plate at that size than there would be if you were a little bit taller.
It's absolutely a challenge, but I'm in on him, man.
Okay, same. I think so. Same. Double.
All right, where do you want to go next?
Do you want to go? Let's just round out quarterbacks. We got a couple more quarterbacks, right? We've got Will Levis and CJ Stroud.
Let's go to CJ Stroud next. Let's do CJ Stroud. The comp that I saw was Jared Goff. CJ Stroud 6'3", 214 official measurements. I think, given where the news is at now with this pre-draft news cycle, CJ Stroud, in a sense, has almost been overshadowed by Bryce Young, by Anthony Richardson, by Will Levis, who we'll talk about here momentarily. But he might be the one with the fewest questions. He is the most accurate passer of this bunch. His touchdown interception ratio, we just talked about Bryce Young's, the last 2 years for CJ Stroud, 85 touchdowns to just 12 interceptions, which is almost impossible. That is an impossible collection over 2 seasons. Are you kidding me? He has done nothing but produce at an extraordinarily high level in these last 2 years as starter. And I know you could say, well, look at the talent around him. He's got the best receivers. He's got a great line. He's got a good backfield. I don't think Will Levis is putting up these numbers at Ohio State. I'm not sure Anthony Richardson is putting up these numbers at Ohio State. CJ Stroud has been very, very solid. What we have seen and what we have talked about, and I'm sure you're going to get into this a little bit, is a few of those deer in headlight moments with him, right? When the play breaks down and the primary guy isn't open, there are moments like that throughout his college career where somebody confused him, the play broke down, and then we had some strange results. We had some strange throws in those scenarios. I think he got better, though. We watched a lot of Ohio State this past season. I feel like he got better. I don't feel like either of Ohio State's 2 losses this past season against Michigan or Georgia were his fault. In the Georgia game, he was sensational. I thought he showed a lot of growth in a big spot. It was not his fault that they lost. They damn near could have won that game. So I think, again, of all the quarterbacks out there, he may not have as high of a ceiling as a guy like an Anthony Richardson, or maybe even like a guy such as Bryce Young. But I think there are fewer questions about CJ Stroud coming into this draft cycle. I'm all in, man. I'm in on him. I like him a lot.
As do I. I'll talk my way through the CJ Stroud experience right now. But CJ Stroud is a quarterback that almost nobody had the luxury of rooting for these past couple years, because the best of CJ Stroud has been and was a quarterback who confidently took a snap in rhythm, threw downfield at the exact right moment to any one of a bajillion terrific receivers, whether it was Emeka Egbuka or Julian Fleming or Marvin Harrison Jr. this past year, or Jackson Smith and Jigba, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson the year before, and good tight ends. And it almost reminds me of the fact that Ohio State didn't necessarily revolutionize offenses these past couple years with CJ Stroud in the way that LSU didn't necessarily revolutionize. They weren't doing anything crazy special with Joe Burrow in 2019. He was just so incredibly confident and on time and throwing to excellence. And so his understanding, like CJ Stroud's understanding of their respective offenses was off the charts. And so the best of Ohio State was, we're going to drop 60 on you in the first half, because I just know exactly when Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be open up the seam out of the slot. I know exactly what defense, I know exactly where the holes are in your cover 3, and I know the precise millisecond to hit Cade Stover or whoever. And I would personally cherish and love rooting for CJ Stroud as my college quarterback. Now, only one of our teams beat CJ Stroud in Ohio State. So I think I can speak to this
Yeah.
a little bit more specifically.
That's what I mean.
You are praying that your defense can do just a little bit to confuse and delay CJ Stroud, because that's where his strength seems to be. It's in that timing, in rhythm, in the pocket. And Oregon did a pretty good job of that. They were able to play the possession game. I think they at least had one pick, which is rare for CJ Stroud, as you mentioned, and you hope to get him off platform. Now, like you mentioned, he got way better off platform as his career progressed. And look what he did against Georgia, the best team in the country this past year. He was, as you put, sensational. So we have that data point now. Like, how does he do? Not against Michigan State, not against Indiana, not against, Penn State, which he actually had some down moments against Penn State's defense this year.
Sure.
But the best of the best of the best. And struggled against Michigan, but came back and didn't erase it, but added a positive data point with what he did against Georgia. Down arguably one of his two best receivers all season long this year in Jackson Smith and Jigba. Made a superstar out of Marvin Harrison Jr., So I come away thinking, yes, you need to be able to improvise. Yes, you need to be great off platform in the NFL, because your offensive line is not going to, bat 1,000. Your receivers are not going to do exactly the right thing every play. So I trust him to develop that feel. And if he's a little bit more willing to, on 3rd and 7, take 9 yards on the ground and go out of bounds, if he's able to, figure out protections at the NFL level, which I'm confident he will, and roll out in the right direction and, know that a tight end is going to be open across the middle, or, a guy running a drag route is going to be open at this moment, and buy himself time to get the ball to that guy, I think he's going to be excellent. I really do. I think all the reports of his work ethic, his command, his poise, if he's able to develop that innate feel when things break down, which is not a given, again, with Nick Bosa, bearing down on you, I'm a buy on CJ Stroud. I just am.
Yeah. I think I'm with you. And look, a lot of what you mentioned, a lot of the ifs, the qualifiers, are things that are called out here in this scouting report that I've got in front of me. Hesitance to use his legs. Labors to get square to the target when rolling out, talking about the off-platform stuff, right? Needs to be better at recognizing and respecting safeties, right? When the primary is not open, make sure you're not throwing into, the wrong spot on like a cover 2. That type of thing. Interceptions arising from when he refuses to come off his primary. So these are things that feel coachable. I'm not a coach. By no means have I been a quarterback. These seem like common things. These seem like wrinkles as opposed to really big questions like we might have with a guy like an Anthony Richardson, who is still very green in terms of passing. CJ Stroud is a much more finished product, at least on the passing side. He's never been a runner. That's not to say he's not athletic. We've seen him move around in the pocket. He has a good feel for the pocket. He knows what he's doing out there for sure. But if he can be a little bit more mobile, if he goes to a bad team, he's probably easily a top 5 pick, maybe a top 10 pick. I don't know how things will shake out for him. But he probably goes to a bad team where he's going to have to showcase some of that athleticism with a line in front of him that might not be up to snuff, at least initially. I really like him. I really like him. I think he's much more of a finished product than any of the other 2 guys that we mentioned. Any of the other 3 guys.
Does it worry you at all that there is one game circled for Ohio State, and these past couple seasons, he did not necessarily rise to the stage and meet that moment?
Yes and no.
For 4 quarters.
Yes and no. Okay. I mean, part of that, sure. Maybe we can look at CJ Stroud and what he did in that Michigan game. But we also need to talk about the Ohio State defense not being able to stop the Michigan offense.
For sure.
That was much more of a factor in Ohio State losing than CJ Stroud.
I totally agree. But it also is a reality that your team is not going to be excellent every week. And if you're a quarterback, there are going to be games, especially big ones, where you will, like we saw Deshaun Watson do against Alabama, you will your team to victory with your unquestionable excellence. And if we're talking about somebody in the top 5, top 10, if we're talking about a quarterback at Ohio State, which has all of the pressures in the world that any of these other quarterbacks, that are playing at Alabama or USC or any of these huge places that they have, CJ Stroud met the moment against Georgia on a neutral site, but it was in a dome. You have extra time to prepare, right? It's a more ideal situation even with that opponent. But outside, in the elements, with the biggest spotlight on you, it gives me pause. Because I saw a quote from him that like he would have won 2 Heismans, or maybe somebody was about him. I don't remember. But if it weren't for 2 games, we'd look at CJ Stroud differently. And I hate that line of thinking because, you know, if it weren't for these wheels, I wouldn't be a bicycle. And that's the thing that I always like, man, those were the moments that I wanted to see just a bit more.
We are in agreement. Shall we get to our final quarterback?
Let's do it.
Will Levis tipped the scales at 229 pounds. He's got a 6'4" frame. Okay. Let me get a few things out of the way here with Will Levis, quarterback,
please,
at Kentucky. Will Levis is obviously very talented. He's proven that he's very coachable. He's tough. He's a big personality. He seems like the consummate teammate. He does have a bit of a disturbing relationship with mayonnaise, which we're just going to put to the side for the purposes of this draft discussion. But he's easy to root for. And my official stance as we make the turn into home of this NFL draft cycle in 2023, my official stance is I like Will Levis a lot. I just wouldn't want to draft him in the first round. I am in near constant disbelief over Will Levis. Complete disbelief for 2 main reasons. The first is Penn State had him on the roster, Dan.
Yeah, he's right there.
Penn State had him on the roster 2 years. They used him primarily as a backup, primarily as a battering ram when they brought him in. They didn't even try to develop him. The version of Will Levis that we have seen the last 2 seasons has almost been a completely different player than what we saw in State College. So good on Will Levis for getting out of there when he did. Coaches don't always play the right guys, so you can't fault James Franklin for all of them. But this is
Joe Burrow was a backup. Yep.
This is a pretty big miss. This was a pretty big miss, especially given the ongoing Sean Clifford experience that we saw over the last couple seasons. But nobody could have predicted that Will Levis would blow up the way that he did. For me as a Penn Stater, I'd be lying if I said I'm not at least a little bit influenced by that here. I still think back to the 2020 version of Will Levis when I'm trying to grade out would I want a guy or not. I can't get that out of my head, but he clearly has done great things. The second reason, definitely more football related. You mentioned at the top of the show, we talked to Nate Tice of The Athletic last year. And at the time, this was right when they were starting to talk about 2023 mock drafts, a full year in advance. And we all saw the Will Levis hype starting then. And I remember I said to him, Nate, I like you. You know a lot more about football than me. I think you're crazy. Why would you put Will Levis this high? And at the time, his answer, which I thought was very smart, was basically that Will Levis had a good frame, that he had a good arm. He clearly showed that he could take a big step forward with a new system if given the chance. And he was somebody, not so much that he was planting his flag in the ground and saying this is a surefire top 10 first round pick, what have you. He was just saying we should monitor him. We should see if he gets better. Right. Because if he continues on this trajectory, there is no denying the fact that he's got top 10 talent. I thought that was a good answer. Did he develop this year?
So he was hurt this year. He lost key pieces, including his offensive coordinator. There are reasons surrounding the Will Levis experience why it wasn't where it was. You know, loses his best receiver and your guy, Wan'Dale Robinson. You're infatuated.
Love him.
Wan'Dale Robinson, who was really, really strong a couple of years ago in the Liam Cohen offense. So, yeah, there are extenuating circumstances. You know, he was out without his best running back the first few games of the season this year, and just nothing really consistently clicked for this Kentucky offense. The defense was inconsistent this year for Kentucky, doing the offense no favors. My worry with Will Levis is, and I don't worry as much about like the Penn State baggage and the up and down nature of his career, because there are always reasons why.
Sure.
My concern is it seems like things need to be ideal for Will Levis to thrive. And it's never really going to be the case, it seems, in the NFL for things to be ideal. Now, we saw Brock Purdy come in, ideal situation. That seems rare for somebody to come in and thrive, but he also performed in an unexpected fashion, as far as I can tell. The Will Levis thing, I understand it. I think maybe not more than you, but I think you have the Penn State baggage, which might prevent some of this for you.
Right.
That I think when a lot of these scouts are looking at quarterbacks, they're not necessarily saying, what was his record? What was his team like? A lot of the base level stuff is he's got to check a number of boxes before we even consider him, right? It's, can he make this kind of throw? Does he have the arm talent? Is he accurate? What is his frame like? What is his speed like? What is, how do people respond to him personally? And then we'll get into the tape against the better teams, the more average teams, and see where his strengths and weaknesses are. It's clear that going back to last year, before the 2022 season, he was seen as somebody who checked a number of boxes. These are the throws you need to make in the NFL. We're not even going to consider you if you can't, and he checked those boxes. So there will be a team that talks themselves into Will Levis because they feel like they can get him that ideal situation. They can have the coordinator in place. They'll have the receivers. They'll have the line. They'll have the system. They'll have the patience to say, we're not starting you for 12 weeks or for 12 months, something like that. And I understand it. I don't think I'm as out as you are, but I definitely agree with the risky nature of Will Levis at this point. Just because, just like what I said for Anthony Richardson, it's not just showing the excellence, it's consistent excellence. And whether it was his own injury this year, whether it was, the offensive system change, whatever it was this year, the Kentucky passing attack left me wanting more. And it wasn't always because of an injured whatever, but it was also because, I don't know, the architecture here, and Will Levis is just making some weird decisions a little bit too often, maybe trying to do everything himself. And so that to me concerns me. So for those reasons, I'm going to pass on Will Levis, but at the same time, if I'm going to be a fence sitter here, I also get the Will Levis thing. I think I do. I'm just, if it's a make-miss kind of show, I think maybe miss me on Will Levis.
How do you feel about Lance Zierlein's comp on NFL.com to Jay Cutler?
That's interesting. Jay Cutler's arm was just out of this world.
Yeah.
In his prime, at his best. And I don't know if Will Levis is necessarily there, but the ability to rise to an occasion. Jay Cutler was showing that kind of stuff at Vanderbilt, and that was not an amazing situation. So I get it from a certain, just the ability to will a team forward and, be that shining star almost unexpectedly at times. But I don't know. Jay Cutler was at times a really good NFL quarterback, and I'm just not there.
I'm just not sure that Will Levis got better. And I think you're right to mention all the qualifiers. He was hurt.
Right.
The team wasn't as good. This team wasn't as good this year. This Kentucky team was not as good. I just would expect something better than 98 yards and 3 picks against Tennessee.
Yeah.
I would expect something more than 109 yards and a pick in a home loss against the aforementioned Vanderbilt Commodores. Stats aren't everything, I know that. But how much of this inconsistency are we willing to explain away because he's got a good frame and a live arm? There have to be limits to that. Accuracy has been a struggle. His ability to sense pressure in the pocket has been a struggle. There are real issues with his game that need to be resolved. Doesn't mean that he's not good enough to rise above it. We saw what he did just in 1 year, moving away from Penn State, working with Liam Cohen, and kind of having this meteoric rise in 2021. That may be in him again. I'm not rooting for him to fail, but at least at present, I think the draftniks are out of their mind with this projection, having him in the top 10. I honestly think it's a case where folks are just so invested in the idea of Will Levis at this point that there's no return. It's in for a dime, in for a dollar. They're just all in, and if he goes down, they'll go down with him.
Well, I think it's also that somebody's got to get picked, right?
Yeah.
That, like, it's not just Will Levis's. I mean, it is Will Levis's merits. That's the most important thing. But you're also comparing him against a number of other quarterbacks that have very specific physical or in-game questions. And so Will Levis showed more in 2021 at times in terms of consistency than Anthony Richardson showed this past year when as the full-time starter. He is better built to be a successful NFL quarterback because of his size and the ability to withstand hits than Bryce Young is.
Yeah.
He has the athleticism and willingness to lead a team with his legs that perhaps CJ Stroud doesn't always have. And so you're looking at the different attributes of Will Levis and you're saying, well, it's not a perfect quarterback class. It's actually a pretty flawed quarterback class. And so is there a certain amount of safety in taking Will Levis because he's a B+ at a lot of things and not an A and a C in a couple, when you're comparing different elements of his games? That's, I think, how you get talked into the Will Levis experience.
Yeah. And, there is position scarcity, as you mentioned.
Totally.
If you need a quarterback, you want to make sure you get one of the four that we discussed because, the next man up is Hendon Hooker. I like Hendon Hooker. Maybe we'll talk more about him as the draft gets closer, but he's coming off an ACL, sure, and that may not be an optimal situation. After Hendon Hooker, you're talking about guys like Tanner McKee. You're talking about guys like Clayton Tune, talking about guys like Dorian Thompson-Robinson, right? It falls off in a hurry. Jake Haener.
My guy, Jake Haener, I was about to say, yeah.
Even Stetson Bennett might be a top 10 quarterback, not top 10 pick in this class. So if you need a guy, you need a guy. And I understand overvaluing it as such, but I'm just, I think I'm out.
Okay.
I think I'm out on Will Levis. I root for him, but I can't talk myself into it.
All right. I hope he wins a Super Bowl in much like the way that Jalen Hurts got the Oklahoma and Alabama social media. I hope Will Levis goes to a Super Bowl and we get a Kentucky-Penn State Accord congratulating Will Levis on his contributions to football society.
We have a list of other players here. We probably have time for about two more.
All right, your choice.
Let's talk about Bijan Robinson. Let's get away from quarterbacks if we could and talk about Bijan.
Yeah.
Bijan Robinson is a tank. He is 5'11". He is 215. He ran a 4.46 40. He is, by all accounts, a 3-down running back who is good at everything. We saw that on display at Texas. The comp per NFL.com is Josh Jacobs. That makes a lot of sense to me. He is physical. He can do pretty much everything. There were many moments over the last couple of years where Bijan Robinson strapped Texas football to his back, and he was the reason they won the game. This past season, close to 1,600 yards in the rushing game. If you add on receiving yards, he's pretty close to about 1,900 yards from scrimmage. So this was, by all accounts, a very successful campaign, a very successful career for Bijan Robinson, Dan. How many times, per your recollection, were we having a conversation about Texas football where the quarterback situation's kind of in flux, the receiver situation, like they have the drops, but Bijan Robinson, again, if he's out there, if he's not nicked up, he is the guy who is going to lead them to the promised land. I feel like that conversation happened on a weekly or bi-weekly basis.
Yeah, he's sensational. I don't have a lot to talk about with Bijan Robinson just because there are no physical questions. There are no game questions, as you mentioned, a 3-down back, and was able to put, his own team on his back for stretches of the season as the passing game stuttered. Did you see Xavier Worthy apparently had a broken hand?
I saw that.
The back half of this season. Sark mentioned that. I don't have any questions. If I were a team who had a lot to improve upon on defense and quarterback, I would just say, hope you don't kill us, Bijan, because we're not taking you. If there is a team who has that final piece missing at an all-purpose type back and in drafting in the top 15 or whatever, I don't have it in front of me. Sure, you absolutely should take Bijan Robinson and then probably not sign him to a second deal because it's just that weird position unless he is so good in the receiving game and is such a matchup nightmare getting linebackers and slower safeties or whatever in coverage that it's just a position that I don't value that much. Again, not as a real NFL fan, but we've seen countless teams do incredible things not paying running backs. So no, I don't have questions about him because his burst, his ability to sense where defenders are coming from, which I guess would be vision, all of that, all the boxes are checked for Bijan Robinson for me. And I'm just I'm exceedingly curious that if he can get to the right team with the right play caller, that can we figure out how to use him as sort of a reverse? I mean, there's a bunch of guys who fit this mold, but like I know I'm saying a lot of 49er players because that's the only team I pay attention to. But like Debo, right? Where you're just like, we're going to move him all over the field. He's going to be a running back, but we don't want him to get hit 30 times a game, but we're going to get creative with him because I don't think there is any better piece of putty in this draft than Bijan Robinson in terms of what you can mold a player into creatively. So yeah, take all of my money and give it to Bijan Robinson, but luckily I am not a GM.
Yeah, I mean, here is the pool of other running backs. Tell me if you would take any of these guys over Bijan Robinson. Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, I would consider it, depending on draft value, yeah.
Zach Evans.
No.
Hello, are you there?
Hello?
You there?
Yep.
Zach Evans.
Continue. Nope. I wouldn't take Zach Evans over Bijan Robinson.
Israel Ibanaconda.
Depends where and who I am, which team I am, but not if I'm sitting there with the top 15, top 20 pick, no.
Any of Devin A-Chain, Zach Charbonnet, or Tank Bigsby?
A-Chain's interesting, but I don't find him to be as tantalizing, even though he was just full-on great. No, again, with top 20, top 18, whatever value, if my owner and if all of the decision makers are saying running back, game changer, versatile running back who can catch out of the backfield, Bijan Robinson is if they're all on the board, Bijan is the only answer to me.
Yeah, I mean, he played 12 games this year at Texas and was just sensational.
Jahmyr Gibbs is interesting to me. If you were like Bijan at 12 or Jahmyr Gibbs at 27, that is interesting to me because since his first game in college, and I've always mentioned this, I've just been a Jahmyr Gibbs fan club president just because of the shiftiness and the ability to change direction without slowing down.
We could talk about him next.
Short of that?
Yeah, let's talk about Jahmyr Gibbs next. We're, I think, both in agreement. Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson, first running back off the board, 6.1 yards per carry this past season at Texas. Very, very good. 1894 from scrimmage.
I especially like those numbers and like his game because watching Texas games, we saw, especially against some of the better teams in second halves and such, that the Texas passing game really struggled.
Yeah.
And so it became clearer and clearer. Do everything you can to take Bijan Robinson out of this game and let Quinn Ewers beat you became the strategy for a number of these teams, and yet he still produced. By and large, still produced.
Let's talk about Jahmyr Gibbs. Bijan Robinson had 6.1 yards per carry. So did Jahmyr Gibbs this past season at Alabama. Jahmyr Gibbs is a little bit smaller. He's 5'9", he's 199. He ran a 4.36 at the combine, which is blazing. Absolutely blazing. He projects, again, not my words, these are the words of scouts and people who do this. He projects as more of a running back too. Not a three-down back. The comp I saw is Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara's had a really good NFL career for the most part. So the fact that he would draw those comparisons, I think, is very interesting. He's also a guy, as compared to Bijan, who's a little bit more active out of the backfield. Caught 44 passes for 444 yards. Very symmetrical, thank you, this past season. It was something that we talked about in the run-up to the 2022 campaign, that in lieu of any obvious targets out wide for Nick Saban and Bryce Young, that they would use Jahmyr Gibbs a little bit more out of the backfield, and they've done that. They did do that this past season. Still, I feel like we didn't talk enough about him. And I wonder if you can speak to that point, because on many of the preseason shows we did this past year, we were all in on Jahmyr Gibbs being like the best thing since sliced bread. Coming over from Georgia Tech, he is going to be a difference maker in this Alabama offense. That's not to say that he wasn't. I just feel like we didn't talk enough about him, and I wonder why that is.
Well, I think part of it has to do with the fact that some of those running backs, this string of running backs at Alabama have been so good.
Yeah.
Most recently, Najee Harris, or Harris Ranch with Najee and Damian Harris. They're around Alabama for a long time. And there's probably no more household team in America than the Alabama Crimson Tide, just with how many huge games on huge networks against huge opponents Alabama plays. They're on CBS all the time. They're on ABC in the playoff or ESPN in the playoff. They're playing all these huge games. Jahmyr Gibbs is in all due respect to Georgia Tech, kind of a relative wasteland at the bottom of the ACC until this past year. So his profile coming into the season is, this was the one really strong offensive player for this down program, and now he's coming to Alabama. But you're also now dealing with a Heisman caliber quarterback and the best coach of all time. And so you're not really afforded the opportunity to sort of flex the shininess of your star power. That's barely English, by the way, when you come in as essentially a one-year rental. And Alabama's defense took its lumps, so then that got a lot of attention. The offensive line, you look at the Texas game, that took some lumps. And so Jahmyr Gibbs was just sort of quiet greatness who didn't necessarily become a constant, enormous problem for every team that Alabama faced, like, Derrick Henry, or, somebody who had built up their name over time, or those great receivers for Alabama. So I think you can get lost in the shuffle, and it almost makes Jahmyr Gibbs a little bit underrated, just because of his path and profile at Alabama. But I'm just enamored with him. I am. I don't know. There's nothing I can really complain about his game with. I don't know how huge he is. How tall? What is it? Height and weight? What is he listed at the moment?
5'9", 199.
Right, which is a little worrisome if you're going to, be a receiver, if you're going to be asked with being an all-purpose player. Bijan's taller than him, correct?
Yeah.
So that worries me a little bit, but not in any sort of serious way. But yeah, I just think he's going to end up being an enormous weapon if he ends up at the right place, and somebody is going to kick themselves, and there will be a conversation of like, hey, and they drafted this guy a pick before Jahmyr Gibbs. How about that? Great job, sarcastically. So no, I'm in on Jahmyr Gibbs, the change of direction, the speed, the willingness to be an all-purpose guy. I guess it's just a size thing and a profile thing at this point.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to go in the second round. He's not a first-round player per the mock drafts that I've seen. It's been 2 decades now where the running back position on draft day has been greatly devalued. It's just you burn through running backs very quickly in the league. Their knees go, their bodies are blown to smithereens because of the wear and tear of the position. So teams have devalued it on draft day. They don't pick running backs as highly as they used to. And I think Jahmyr Gibbs is probably a guy who's very versatile. You can fit him in almost anywhere. I wanted to see more from him this past season. He already had a good year, but I was a little disappointed by the fact that we weren't talking more about Jahmyr Gibbs. And that's for a variety of reasons, many of which are probably not his fault. So I think he's great to plug into the right offense, and he's definitely somebody who can help out of the backfield.
I think it's easy at Alabama to get lost in the shuffle as a running back as they've aired it out more these past few years. First with Tua and Mac Jones and now Bryce Young, where the receivers have been so good and the scoring has been so electric for the most part for Alabama that you don't look at Jahmyr Gibbs in the same way as guys where you just handed the ball and they would just constantly bruise and then bust a big one and look like NFL running backs while still at Alabama. So I guess that sort of works against Jahmyr Gibbs.
Jahmyr Gibbs, I would say, is probably my favorite player with respect to the scouting report. Can I read a few of these quips?
Please do.
These are great.
Yeah.
Runs with instant acceleration and gliding strides.
Same. Yep.
opens the corner by altering tempo and stride to stall pursuit. That's apparently English. I'm not even sure I understand that sentence.
I'm going to sit down with that sentence and break it down word for word to make sure I can get to the right place.
Wiggle results in low success rate for open field tacklers. There are definitely more succinct ways to say that sentence, but okay, we'll continue.
I'm okay with it.
Mismatched weapon in the passing game, we knew that. Hands are natural, soft, and sure.
Same.
Above average potential as a kick returner. We saw that, obviously, at Alabama this past season.
Yeah.
I like him a lot. I would definitely take a flyer on him.
Same. Absolutely.
Write in solidverbal@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts on Jahmyr Gibbs. Let us know your thoughts on other players. We just picked out, 6 offensive stars that have been talked a lot about here over the last week or so. We can continue to do that if that's something you're interested in. We could do defense, talk a little offensive line if we want. I don't know much about that, but
sure,
we can do our best here on the show. Let us know, again, via email. If you are on Patreon, head on over to the Discord. Give us your comments about players that we discuss here today, or perhaps players that we should discuss next. And certainly, if you are out on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever, YouTube, stop on by. Let us know your thoughts. We'd be eager to hear your analysis of whether or not you would take any of the 6 guys that we discuss here today.
How much of the draft will you watch?
Now that they're doing it on Thursday nights, it does present an interesting opportunity.
Yeah.
I think I watched all of the first round last year. And
wow.
I got pretty deep into Friday, but then I fell off Friday morning or Saturday morning, whenever they started up, Saturday afternoon.
I love not watching the draft now, but I love finding out. So I generally, I'm like playing sports, or I'm playing in some league on Thursday nights now. And the draft at this point takes so long.
Yeah.
And because I don't actively root for an NFL team, I just see it as an incredible reveal for whenever I pick up my phone after playing tennis or whatever. So, yeah, I didn't watch it last year. I love all of the stuff leading up to it. I love the stuff after it and seeing where everybody's going and seeing reports come out of, mini camp or whatever.
Yeah.
But the actual draft show itself, my ADHD can't handle it. It just can't.
Well, we'll talk more about this. We've got a ways to go here, like 6 weeks. Yeah. I think it's the end of April. The draft is in Kansas City this year. We will talk more about this. Maybe we'll bring Nate or somebody back on to discuss players as we get a little bit closer, as pro days and things of that nature start to happen. But in the time being, you're out there in California. I'll be doing a solo interview show on Thursday, so make sure you stop back for that. And we will have a special treat for everybody for the Bruin A this week. I promise you.
Ooh.
I promise you. In your absence, Dan, while you're out there enjoying some time away, I'm going to listen. I can't wait. We will make it worth your while. For that guy over there in sunny Southern California, for myself, Ty Hildebrand over here in Eastern PA, thanks again for downloading, for listening, for supporting the show. Make sure you hit subscribe. We'd love to talk to you again here in the next few days. The off season rolls on. Stay solid.
Peace.